All right, so we're going to start at 7 o'clock. We like to start things on time here at EX2. So I want to welcome everybody. My name is Andy Bacon. I'm the race director at EX2 and I own the company. I will be responsible for your pain or your pleasure at VentureQuest, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. We have, it looks like, a mix of people who are new to the sport of adventure racing, but I know for a fact that we have several people who are on the call who have a lot of experience with adventure racing. So what I'm planning on doing is I am going to cover some basics about the sport and adventure racing, a little bit of history and stuff like that, but I'm probably going to cover that second. So if there are folks who are more experienced and you don't want to listen to that, that's totally fine. And you want to hop off, you're welcome to do so. I am going to keep everybody's line muted. If you do have something you want to communicate with me, the best way to do that is via the chat, and I do have that open. So if you have a question about something I'm saying, or a particular question about kind of what's going to happen at the event, I am monitoring that. So just type it in chat and I will either address it like in real time once I see it, or at the appropriate place during the talk. So before we go into sort of the details about VentureQuest and then some of the background about adventure racing, let me just tell you a little bit about VQ as an event, about EX2 and about me as a person, to give you some context. So EX2, we're in our 22nd year of existence. I've run the company for 5 years. VentureQuest was actually the first event that my predecessor Jim put on in 2000, and it was a little EX2 trivia. VentureQuest was actually put on before EX2 was even an organization. So we have a really long history with adventure racing, and VentureQuest is literally kind of where it all started for EX2 over 20 years ago. This will be our 16th edition of this race, and the first time that we've put it on outside of Fairfax County. So the first 10, 11, 12, 13 editions of this race were at Fountainhead in Fairfax County, which, if you've been there, it's an awesome park, awesome mountain biking, great reservoir to paddle in. When I took over EX2, I had VentureQuest there in 2018. But then I wanted to do something different. So in 2019, 2020, actually, no, 2019, 2021. No, yes. 2018 was at Fountainhead. 2019, 2020, I moved to Poheck Bay on the Mason Neck Peninsula. And then in 2021, we moved back to Fountainhead. So when I was thinking about sort of where I wanted to do VentureQuest back a year ago, we do some events up in Montgomery County, and we do a lot in Seneca Creek State Park. And it's like the trail system in Montgomery County in general is, I would say, world-class. It's awesome. So it was an obvious choice to, if I was going to move VentureQuest, to move it up and run it out of Seneca Creek. So the whole venue is really a whole bunch of Seneca Creek State Park. It's quite a large park. And we're staging at a great place called the Button Farm Living History Center. And if you've ever run either the Schaefer Half Marathon or our Blue Crab Pole race at Schaefer, we staged out at Button Farm. So it's a really cool place to stage a race. It's a working farm. They have animals and a huge field. So it's really just a cool spot. There is camping. So if you wanted to camp Friday and or Saturday, you can do that. That was in one of the last emails I sent you. There's like a link that you can just sign up. It's $20. You can stay for one night or 2 nights. All the money just goes to the farm. But if you're traveling from some distance or don't feel like driving home or whatever, you're more than welcome to camp. It is fairly primitive, like it's basically a field. We'll have porta potties, but there's no running water or any other sort of amenities. So it's you have to basically bring and take with you anything that you need. So that's VentureQuest. So I'm excited about this event. I will tell you that I have like a multi-year plan for running VentureQuest out of this area, because there are multiple places to go to do cool stuff around Button Farm. And so this is the first edition. I plan to do it if everything goes well, again next year and probably the year after, showing off different parts of Montgomery County and the trail systems that they have there. If you've happened to look at where the race is taking place, there are multiple bodies of water that can be used for paddling. There's Black Hill Regional Park, there's the Potomac River, there's Clopper Lake. So there's at least 3 places we can go paddle. I'm not saying we're going to use all of those, but there are multiple places to go. So I'm kind of excited about the possibility of doing some really cool stuff over the next couple of years. So that's VentureQuest. If this is going to be your first EX2 race, we do other events besides adventure racing. So this year we had 17 in-person races. We had a bunch of trail running races from 5Ks to half marathons. We have an Xterra triathlon. We have our first ultra distance trail running race. We have an awesome gravel grinder out in Loudoun County. We had a mountain bike race, and maybe we might have 2 mountain bike races next year. So stay tuned for that if you happen to be a mountain biker. So lots of good, fun stuff. So I love adventure racing. I would say that of all the things sort of sport-wise that have influenced my life over the past 2 decades, without a doubt, I would say that it's been the sport of adventure racing. I fell into it sort of by chance. In the mid-2000s-ish, I had gotten into Xterra triathlon. So I started mountain biking and I started trail running. And I did a couple of Xterras. And then one day, my girlfriend at the time's co-worker's husband somehow knew I was doing this stuff and asked me if I wanted to do a 24-hour adventure race out at Andy Guest State Park, which is Shenandoah River State Park out in near Front Royal. And I did it, and I had the most amazing time ever. And from that point on, in 2006, I was hooked. I've done a fair amount of adventure racing, both in the States, and I've done some overseas events. I've done a couple world championships. I've done lots of US championships. I've raced with a lot of different people. And it really has had a huge impact on my life. So one of my goals in hosting an adventure race is to hopefully get more people to know what the sport is and enjoy it, and hopefully go out and do other adventure races. You know, EX2 only has 1 adventure race that we put on, but the Mid-Atlantic, if you live in the Mid-Atlantic, which I would assume most of you do, this is like the hotbed of activity for adventure racing. So, you know, if you lived out in, you know, I don't know, Iowa, you wouldn't have many options to do adventure races. But within the Mid-Atlantic, Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, just in that particular area, that there's quite a few really good event promoters and people who know what they're doing, and some great events. So again, my hope is that if this is going to be your first experience, that you have fun, you enjoy it, and you go out and want to do more. That being said, let me give you a little insight into how I design my courses, which is relevant both for experienced adventure racers and people who are new. So in adventure racing, the promoter will advertise a distance, right? They might say it's a 12-hour race and it's going to be X number of miles. One of the things I don't particularly like too much when I do a race is if somebody says it's going to be a 24-hour race, I don't necessarily like when I finish in 8 hours or 10 hours. So one thing to know about me as a course designer is if I say the race is going to be 6 hours or 10 hours, there's a good chance that you'll be out there for a good chunk of that time. So if you're doing the 6-hour race, even if you are a really solid athlete and have a lot of experience, I would not say you're going to finish the race in 3 hours. I have some folks pre-running it actually on Friday. And so I like to verify sort of what my estimates are going to be by somebody other than myself. And I'll report back sort of how things go. But I would assume that for both events, you're going to be out there for most of that, if not all of that time. Another thing to know is I don't design the courses so that everybody finishes everything. You may or may not like that. But again, it's really hard to design a course that keeps people out there for the whole time. And and with such varying levels of experience, just like in any sport, right? You have a 3-hour marathoner, and you have a 6 or 7-hour marathoner, right? So you have this huge spread. Same is true for adventure racing. So again, plan on being out there for most of the time, but if you don't finish the entire course, don't worry about it, right? Everyone is going to do the best they can, and you will be surprised that even if you don't get all the points, you may do very, very well. So take that as you will. All right. So again, just another plug. If you have questions as I go through, please paste them in the chat, and I will go over them. All right. So the first thing I want to do is I want to hopefully everybody can see my screen. Somebody give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat. Just you guys can see it. Good, awesome. Is I want to go over some logistics. So it's at Button Farm. So the directions are there. Button Farm is a private. It's sort of a relationship with the state park, but it is like a private entity. So please don't go there before race day and like go and hang out, right? There's a gate that's there. So it's a race day thing, or if you're camping on Friday evening, on Saturday, you can go, but please don't go like next weekend and ride around Button Farm. Race format, 6-hour race and a 10-hour race. It is not a relay, meaning so if you are doing the event, and you are on a team of 2 or 3, you do everything together. I'll talk more about that when I go over sort of like the basics of adventure racing a little bit, but just know that if you're on a 2 or 3 person team, you're doing everything together. That's one of the joyous things of what makes adventure racing great. In terms of timelines, so the 10-hour race starts at 8 o'clock in the morning and finishes at 6 in the evening. That is during daylight, okay, and that is by design. The 6-hour race starts at 9 a.m. and finishes at 3 p.m. We are going to do check-in and map distribution the morning of the race. And so you'll see on there the 10-hour race check-in starts at 6 a.m. and the 6-hour race check-in starts at 6:30. I would say it's in your best interest to get there right when we open check-in or soon thereafter, so you have plenty of time to park, get your maps, look over things, and get ready to race. And if none of that makes any sense to you, just hang on to the second part of the talk when I talk about what maps are and rules of travel. But just know, especially if you're new, and I say the race starts at 8 o'clock and the race brief is at 7:15, that does not mean that you should show up at like 7 o'clock and think you're going to have enough time. So please get there early. It's going to be less stressful for you and everybody if you give yourself plenty of time.
How early can we get there?
Jeremy, you always have good questions. Check-in starts at 6 a.m. for the 10-hour race and 6:30 for the 6-hour race. That's when you'll get your maps. We'll be there at the latest at 5 a.m. on race day. So please don't get there before then. I mean, if you're camping, you can get there whenever, but hope that answers the question. All right. Gear, stuff you're going to need. And so this is really important. Again, if you're a more experienced racer, you know to look for this. If you're new to the sport, I'm going to talk more about this later on. Everybody you bring your own bicycle. I would highly recommend a mountain bike. Could you ride a gravel bike? Sure. I would say if you're have really good bike handling skills, you could probably ride all the trails that I'm going to take you on a gravel bike. Most of the riding is on single track, and some of it is rocky and rooty. Some of it is nice and smooth, but a mountain bike is your bike of choice if I was doing the race. If you don't have a mountain bike, I would say try to get one. I'm going to send out some links to maybe places to rent around our area. So if you got a mountain bike, I would ride it. Everybody's got to have a bike helmet, right? And you have to have a way to carry enough food and water for the event. Some notes on that. There's a fairly long bike section. If you're doing the 10-hour race, it's a pretty long bike section early on in the race. If you're doing the 6-hour race, it's long enough. I would say at least an hour, hour and a half or so on the bike early on. There will be water at the paddle put in, the paddle takeout, as well as before and after an orienteering section. So there will be water out on the course, and I will put that in an email out either later this week or next week with sort of some more descriptions of kind of when things are going to happen to help you plan. I already did put out the order of disciplines that's going to happen in the race, and that's in one of the emails that I sent out most recently. Just know that there will be some water at the start and on the course. Race maps. We give you all your maps. We give you the rules of travel. Your passport, we use electronic punching, so you don't have to worry about that. If you don't know what that is, hang tight until I talk about that in a little bit. I would definitely carry some basic bike stuff, so a spare tube, at least one per team, maybe even two is a good idea. And a way to inflate that tube is a great idea. A pump or CO2 or both, and some multi-tool if you have something you need to fix on the trail. A watch is something you need to have. I want you to know what time it is. A cell phone is mandatory gear, one per team. It'll be, don't look at it. It's part of the rules. You can't pull out your cell phone to figure out where you are, obviously, but it's for safety. Cell phone coverage across the entire course. So if anything bad happens to you or another team, a cell phone is your best first line of defense to get help. You don't want your dry bag to take a swim if you take a swim. So a small dry bag, either like a commercially made dry bag or a couple of Ziplocs is great to keep your cell phone dry. And a whistle. A whistle, a lot of backpacks have whistles integrated in them now. If you don't have a backpack like that, you can pick up a whistle dirt cheap on Amazon or REI or whatever. The reason for that is it's an amazing way to get attention to yourself if you need to get attention to yourself. So that's why. So basic stuff for safety, cell phone and a whistle. Not requiring you to carry any sort of medical kit for this race unless you want to. What I would recommend that you bring, I'll have some mat bags, some small, probably 8x11 plastic bags that you can put your maps in. The maps will sort of be varying levels of waterproofness, but I would not count on them being fully waterproof. So having them in a little Ziploc or something is in your best interest. Weather for the day, obviously clothes. If I don't know what it's going to be, hot, cold, raining, whatever. So please dress appropriately. And a compass. So I will say, not everyone who is doing this race I know is going to be proficient with a compass. It's a good thing to have because it at least can tell you like which way is north, even if you have no idea of sort of how to use it. It could be useful. Now we're not going to be in the middle of a wilderness, so you're not really going to be lost for too long because you're going to hit a highway or something if you just walk in one direction. But it's a good idea to have. I will say some of the orienteering sections, it may be useful to have a compass. If you have it and you know how to use it, I would certainly bring it. I had a couple questions related to gear. First question, is it rain or shine? It is rain or shine, but we're not in the business of completely trashing trails either. So if we have to do a modified course, I'm prepared to do that and modify things as needed. Let's see. Rob had a question. Can we leave a bag with the bike and then leave with the bike after? Yeah, if you're dropping you're riding someplace and you drop your bike and you're going off and do other things, the only thing you're required to have with you is your mandatory gear. So that would be, your maps, your watch, your cell phone, your whistle. If you have some food or whatever or extra stuff that you want to leave with your bike because it's heavy, you don't want to carry it, absolutely leave it with your bike. There's going to be people there at the main sort of transition from biking to whatever you're doing next. Is a bike lock suggested? No, I don't think you need a bike lock. There are going to be opportunities to drop it randomly on the course and in one section in particular. I wouldn't stress about it too much. It's not a very high trafficked area. And anybody out there is going to be a mountain biker, so they're not going to take your bike. And we get two sets of maps, most likely. Let me noodle on that a little bit, and but most likely. I know that's very handy for teams. Can the course be cleared? Yes, both courses can be cleared, but not by everybody. Selene has a question about, is there a TA where we have a bin? I will tell you this. With both courses, you will have an opportunity at varying times to go through the farm, Button Farm, which is where we stage. However, most of the time, you will not be anywhere near Button Farm. So in the 6-hour course, it is theoretically possible after the sort of the beginning section, which is sort of just designed to space people out. You might not go back to Button Farm until the very end of the race when you punch at the finish. So could you have stuff? Sure, but you might not actually see it until the end. Along those lines, a helpful hint: if you ride your bike with clipless pedals, meaning you clip into your pedals, you will have a progression of sort of biking and then not biking, so paddling and trekking and then biking again. If you don't want to trek or paddle in your clip shoes, then you have to have a way, or you don't want to trek in your whatever you're wearing to bike, then I would have a way to carry your running shoes with you in your backpack. So whatever plan you're having or whatever pack you're planning to use, make sure that your shoes will fit in your backpack if you want to carry them. There you go. So there's a little hit. Sam asked the question, is there enough parking at Button Farm for all the cars? 100%. We have lots of room there, so don't stress about that. All right, let's see. Directions there, awards, we go 5 deep in all our age groups. A couple other rules to be aware of. No GPSs. So the only exception would be the Garmin Enduro watch that happens to have an adventure race mode in it. And if you don't know what that is, or have an Enduro watch, or one of them, I think maybe some of the newer Phoenixes might have it. Can't use a GPS watch. You can use a bike computer that's not GPS. So that's used, calculates the distance based on the revolutions of your tire. Those are totally fine and could be helpful to have. Stay within 100 feet of your teammates at all times. So again, this is if you're new to the sport, not a relay. So you have to stay close together, for better or for worse, throughout the event. And Dave, thank you. Phoenix 6 and newer have the AR mode. If you don't know what that means, then don't stress about it. Yes, so if you have a Garmin watch with an AR setting, you can use it. So Nicholas, that answers specifically your question. If you have it and know how to use it, you can use your watch, because what it basically does is it shuts off all of the visible signs of distance and elevation, actually, when you're in AR mode. So Dave says Phoenix 6 and higher have the new AR mode. So again, if you know what that is, great. Tom had a question, do you need water purification? Another good question. I don't think so. I'm going to say no. There's going to be water at the start, and there's going to be water for a good portions of sections of the middle. So I wouldn't worry about it. Can you bring your own boat? No, you can't. You're going to use our boats. If you want to use your own PFD and paddle, you're welcome to do that, but you have to carry them to and from the paddle. And I will tell you, it's not a short distance. But no boats. You can't bring your own boat. Let's see. I think that's all the basics that I wanted to cover. The big thing was the timing, especially folks who are new, when to get there. Just get there early, And I'm going to put out several more emails with very detailed information that'll remind you of that fact. But especially if you're new to the sport, make sure you give yourself time. Jeremy asked another question. Can you leave your paddles? No, you carry them there and you carry them back. We have an outfitter giving us about 100 boats, lots of paddles, lots of PFDs, and I don't want to be responsible for someone's personal stuff. So if you want to use them, you certainly can, but you have to take them there and bring back. All right, so that's sort of like the logistics of stuff that I wanted to cover. Had a lot of good questions, so thank you for that. What I'm going to do now is I want to shift into more of a general clinic on adventure racing. So if you feel that you got it, you're comfortable with it, you just certainly don't have to stay. But I know we do have a lot of new folks in the sport, and so I want to take a few steps back and talk about adventure racing and give you some more context of all the fun you're going to have at VentureQuest. Oh,
Sorry,
Aaron,
and yeah.
Hold on one sec, Jeremy. We had a couple more questions. Aaron, hey, Aaron Bernard, is there a point penalty for late arrival? Yes, that'll be outlined in your rules of travel. It's a pretty standard thing that we've used for years and years and years. I think it's like a point if you're a minute late, and then every 5 minutes later, it takes more checkpoints away. Don't be late. So it's best to show up back on time. Yes, don't be late in the beginning either, Dave, Mr. Dolling. Yeah, but it's late ending. Good question, Eric. More good questions. Are the points going to be pre-plotted? Yes, every point is going to be pre-plotted. You don't have to plot any UTMs or anything like that. So everything is pre-plotted on the maps. And by the way, maps, which I'm going to show you examples of what our maps might look like in a second. Scales are going to range from 1 to 12,000 to 1 to 24,000. So they're going to be varying scaled maps. Some of them are going to be adjusted for declination. Some of them are not. I will say the ones that are not adjusted for declination, it's not that huge of a deal. The ones that are adjusted, it's more important that they are. It makes it easier. Lily, does map have a grid? Yes, it does have a grid. I'm going to show you maps, so hang on to those thoughts, but they're all topographic maps. So there's plenty of stuff you can use to know where you are. 3-person teams, what kind of boat they want. So 3-person teams are going to be in canoe. So 1 person in each seat and a lucky person in the middle. There are 2 Seneca trails. There's actually several trails around there. Seneca Greenway is mostly off limits to bikes. Seneca Ridge Trail is multi-use. It'll all be outlined in your rules of travel, which if there's any trails you can't go on. Declination will be on the map. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh yeah, so that actually what I was going to say. So declination is going to be on the map for the ones that are not adjusted. Is
Correct.
that what you were going to say?
That's correct.
So you'll be able to self-adjust on the ones that aren't adjusted, and then the ones that are adjusted, you just don't worry about declination at all.
That's right. That's right. And I guess my point is the ones that aren't adjusted, it's more macro nav. Like you're not necessarily 10 degrees or whatever the deck angle is in our area. It's not super critical.
What on the back to the paddle thing? So are you effectively, if you're doing the 10-hour, are you effectively going to be carrying the paddles for the whole race? Or is there a moment where you can like ditch the paddles somewhere back at the start or whatever?
You'll have to just wait to see what the course is. I will tell you on the 10-hour course, it's a long way to the paddle, but there is a way to sort of shorten how long you're carrying the paddles with a little bit of a penalty, meaning you kind of like scoot back through the TA, pick up your paddles and take off again. But it'll be obvious to you when you see your maps and the routes of whether you think it's a good idea or not to bring your own paddles. So if you want to bring them, great. And then you can decide when you see the maps. Eric, the plotting, everything is pre-plotted, so you don't have to worry about plotting. Yep, set sample maps. Hang on, I'm going to show you this in a second. Would we have to carry the extra seat if you want it? Yes, you would, but the paddle is not long. I will tell you that. Last year's 12-hour race had a super long paddle. If you hated that, you were going to love this paddle because it's not too long. So I would say, honestly, don't carry a third seat. Sit on a backpack or something, or just kneel down on or sit on the bottom of the boat. All right, Steve, I'm going to hold on that declination question first until we look at the maps. It'll make more sense to folks then. All right, so I'm going to switch gears, and I want to talk about more about adventure. Keep the questions coming, by the way. So if you see things that I'm talking about, or something comes to mind, please just keep it coming, because they're all good questions. And I want you to feel comfortable with going into the event. Let's see. So we did introductions. We talked about logistics stuff for VentureQuest. Great. I want to go through, starting at a very high level, and a little bit of history of where the sport of adventure racing came from, because I think it's relevant to gain an appreciation for the sport. I'll talk a little bit about formats and disciplines. I've already talked a little bit about it, but I'll give you a little bit more context about it. I'll show you some maps. I'll show you example rules of travel, and then we can talk about gear and bikes and things like that. So adventure racing, the best way I like to describe adventure racing is as a comparison to triathlon, because most people understand the sport of triathlon. They understand that it's a multi-sport, meaning you do multiple things. They understand that it's typically swim, a bike, and a run. And they understand that most of the time it's a solo sport, meaning you do it as an individual. You know, we've all probably heard stories of Ironmans or watched it on TV or whatever, or maybe you've done a triathlon yourself. Adventure racing has a lot of similarities to triathlon. It's multi-sport, meaning in an adventure race, you're doing multiple things. You know, you are on foot, you're typically riding a bike, and you're typically paddling. Some adventure races have other things. Historically, there's been things like horseback riding or inline skating or climbing or other things. But traditionally, like the core three things in terms of sports are mountain biking, trail running, trekking, and paddling. However, adventure races differs from triathlon in a lot of key ways. One of which is triathlon is primarily a solo sport. You do it by yourself, generally. There are relays, you know, in the triathlon world, but generally it's like you're doing as an individual. Adventure racing, on the other hand, is primarily a team sport and has its history in a team-based sport. So although a lot of adventure races nowadays offer a solo category, just like VentureQuest does, the premier category, if you will, in adventure racing is typically 3 or 4 people. And typically it's co-ed. So the history, adventure racing really has been around since the late 80s, I guess, 1980s. A guy named Gerard Fusil is credited with the first sort of modern day adventure race called the Raid Gaulois. Little trivia, the Gaulois got its name because it was like a cigarette company that sponsored the race. So there you go. But that was the sort of first example of teams of 6 back in the day, biking and horseback riding and paddling and navigating their way using a map and compass across, in this case, hundreds of miles in the raid. Which takes me to another contrasting point with triathlon. So triathlon, if you look up, I don't know, Ironman Lake Placid, generally it's like the same course every year. And generally it's swim, bike, run. You can go out and practice the run course or practice the bike course. And you can find maps of the course on their website. Well, in an adventure race, the courses change all the time. In VentureQuest, this is our 16th edition of VentureQuest. We haven't had 2 of the same courses ever. The disciplines might have always been sort of paddling and mountain biking and trail running, or whatever, but the order in which they're done changes all the time, even within the same race from year to year. So that to me is one of the things that makes adventure racing wonderful, but it can also be one of the things that is really intimidating for people who are brand new to the sport, because when you don't know necessarily what you're getting into, you can't like see what you're going to be doing, it creates a lot of anxiety. And so one of the reasons that I chose this year to sort of put out the order of disciplines that you would be doing is to give people a little bit of a little nugget of kind of what they were getting into. Not everybody likes that. Not a lot of races don't put out sort of like the order of things. The long expedition races, that's really common nowadays to put out sort of like, here's like the course preview and the times and the distances within each leg of the race. But a lot of short races don't do it. But the reason I did it is I wanted, especially newer folks to the sport, to get a little bit of comfort and sort of insight of what they were going to be doing. Now, it doesn't tell you where you're going to be going. It doesn't tell you how long each discipline is. It doesn't tell you where the checkpoint locations are. So there's plenty of unknowns for sure, and I'm well aware of that. But to me, that level of unknown, again, it creates some anxiety, but it's one of the things that makes adventure racing so unique. The other thing about adventure racing in terms of course design is they're designed by people, right? And so the great thing about it is if you go and do other people's events, they all have these little, intricacies about how they design the courses, which really makes the sport very, very interesting. So around us, there's great companies like Rootstock Racing out of Pennsylvania. They put on great events. I know Dave Dong is on the phone. So the Broad Run Outdoors has an adventure race coming up pretty soon, actually, and they're going to have another one in the spring next year. They put on great events, but their sort of MO in designing courses is different than mine, just like the folks at Rootstock, just like Michelle at Adventure X Racing and others. Again, it's one of the things that makes the sport so awesome. And so I would really encourage you that if you do VentureQuest and you have fun, or even if you don't have fun, do more, because the experience is going to really vary depending on where you're racing. And it's really a pretty magical thing. Again, contrasting to triathlon. So triathlon, you're a soloist generally going out there by yourself. In adventure racing, you're doing it as a team, right? So team dynamics play a huge element, and it can be one of the most challenging aspects of adventure racing, but it can also be one of the most fulfilling and wonderful. Some of the best friends I have in the whole world I've met through the sport of adventure racing. Let's see. So paddling, biking, running, maps. So a little bit more history, which I think is really interesting. So Gerard Fossil created this thing. Back, I don't know what year it was, but there was a gentleman who did one of his raids, and his name was Mark Burnett. And Mark Burnett thought these things were really cool, and so he brought it back to the States and negotiated with Mr. Fossil to sort of bring that type of thing to the US. Well, Mark Burnett, you might recognize his name. He was the producer of Survivor. So he created a race called Eco Challenge. So Eco Challenge was around 1995-ish to sort of the early 2000s. The last one was in 2002 in Fiji. Until recently, there was another edition of Eco Challenge that was on the air in 2020 back in Fiji, and it was on Amazon. So you can actually go to Amazon and look it up. And if you haven't seen, it's like a multi-part TV show. It's pretty cool. So you should check it out. But Eco Challenge sort of died. I'm not sure if it's going to come back, to be honest with you. In the mid 2000s, there was a really popular expedition race series called Primal Quest. They had several of them in the US and Canada. But that kind of didn't make it either. So nowadays, some of the really in the US, there's really two organizations, a couple more to pay attention to, but the two primary ones that in the adventure racing world that people pay attention to are the US Adventure Racing Association, the USARA, and the ARWS, so AR World Series. So USARA is just US-based events, and on their website, there's some great calendars with races all over the country. So if you've never been to usara.com, you should check it out. And then the other one really cool to look at is ARWS, the Adventure Racing World Series. So there are adventure races all over the world. AWS, at least currently, is focused on more longer expedition type races, but it's a really great website to check out and sort of dream about traveling around the world and adventuring around. So you should check them out if you've never heard of those. All right, let's see. When you're out in the adventure race, so I'll cover maps and rules of travel in a second, but your goal is to basically make your way around the course, and you're looking for things that we call checkpoints, CPs. In the orienteering world, they call them controls. In our races, every checkpoint is going to have an orienteering flag, which is what you see here. Typically, they're 12 by 12 square, orange and white, and they're going to have a little electronic box hanging near it. When you check in, you're going to get an electronic, it's called an SI card, which is basically like a little RFID reader. And when you go to your checkpoint, you put the little dipper thingamajiggy inside the box, it beeps at you, and that's how you record or how we know you've been to each checkpoint. One of the terms that you may hear in the sport is the term of called a passport. So before electronic timing, and still a lot of your races do not use electronic timing, there was a way to record whether someone's been to each one of the checkpoint locations in either a little book, literally looks like a little passport, which is where it got its name, or it's like a single sheet of Tyvek paper. There are lots of events that use Tyvek paper. And so hanging at each one of these orienteering flags, at our races, you take your little electronic SI card, dip it in the box, it beeps, and that's how we know you've gone to each place. But if you do a race that has manual timing, you have your little passport, which is a little piece of paper, Tyvek paper, most likely. And you go to each checkpoint, and there's a little punch, and that punch has unique pinpricks, and you put your pinprick in the corresponding box on that piece of Tyvek paper, and then you turn your Tyvek paper in at the end. So if you ever hear the term passport, that's what that means. In our races, it's electronic, but a lot of races you may go to they don't use electronic timing, so you actually get a physical piece of paper. As you can imagine, that's something you don't want to lose, but it does happen. All right, so maps and rules of travel. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this, because this, again, I'd say is the navigation element of adventure racing is a huge differentiator from other sports like triathlon. It's also one of the things that causes the most anxiety, because a lot of people, unless you have a background in land navigation or orienteering, it's a very foreign thing. Using a map and a compass, or even using a map in the land to orient where you are, can be challenging, especially when you're new to the sport. So I want to tell you about rules of travel, show you some pictures of some of the maps that we have used in the past, which will give you insight of what you're going to get when you show up on race day. So in this picture, this is the rules of travel over here, and there's a couple of different examples of maps, and I'm going to show you close-up pictures in a second. So one thing to know about the maps is you're going to get different types of maps and different styles, and I'll show you some pictures to sort of concrete or help you understand what that means. The rules of travel, so when you show up to the race, you check in, in terms of helping you progress the way through the course, you're really going to get two pieces of very important information. You get your maps, and you're going to get your rules of travel. So on the rules of travel, it basically tells you two very important things. It tells you the order of disciplines that you are going to do in the race. So it might say leg 1 or segment 1 is a paddle, as in this case. Leg 2 is a trek, leg 3 is a blah, blah, blah. And so this is chronologically what you're going to be doing. Oh, hold on one second. Can I make it full screen? I think so. You can also see. Let's zoom in a little bit. Hope that's a little bit bigger. If that's a little bit bigger, please let me know. Drop it in chat. And I can actually, if you want, what I can do is I can send out some old rules of travel and maps to you guys via email, so that you get a sense of what that is. Maybe I'll do that too. Cool, I'll do that. But again, your passport says this discipline first, this discipline second, this discipline third, what have you. And they have instructions within a particular segment. What they say is things like paddle to these points, for example, in order, or they might say paddle to these things in any order, and that might hold true for paddling and biking, whatever. So the first thing is like a description of what you're doing in that particular leg or segment of the race. The second thing is it's going to list the checkpoints within that particular segment. So in this particular case, we have a paddle segment, and there's points P1, P2, P3, and so on and so on. And next to that is a clue. So you have your rules of travel, which tells you the order of disciplines plus clues for the particular checkpoints. And then you have a
if you hit the slideshow button on the top right corner, then you can present, and then we'll see the whole thing.
Oh, there you go. I lost chat before. Do you guys see this? Do you guys see the speaker notes and stuff up here, or is it just my screen?
Yeah, we see the speaker notes.
Here, I'll just move over. I'll move over.
Yeah, perfect. That's so much better. Thank you.
Better? Good, good, good. Sorry. Thank you. All right. So you have a rules of travel, which tells you what you're doing, plus it has the checkpoint descriptions. And on your maps, you have a topographic map with a whole bunch of information on it. And one of the pieces of information it has on it is a little red circle, typically, that has the corresponding number for each particular checkpoint. So as an example, you see P1, small beach. When you find P1 on the map, well, that clue corresponds to that particular map location. So the first thing you do when you get your maps and rules of travel is you read the whole rules of travel from start to finish. That's what I would recommend. And then you go through and look at where the locations are on the map, and you decide how you're going to navigate your way to find the different checkpoints using the rules as they're described. So again, as an example, certain legs are going to say, do these checkpoints in order. Other legs might say, do them in any order. And if they say in any order, part of the strategy is to figure out, well, which is the order is going to be most efficient. Now, let me give you an idea of some maps and what they look like. So this one is a topographic map. This is an orienteering style map, and you will get a map at VentureQuest that looks like this in terms of this style. Lots of detail. Things that has a legend. It tells you information like blue is water, obviously. It has contour lines, which tell you if you're going up or down, as well as the steepness of the terrain. Black lines are roads. This yellow orangey section here is like open field. Everything with the white background is forested. The maps also would have some indication of vegetation. And so one of the things that people who are new to the sport of orienteering get hung up on is when they look at a map like this and they see a combination of white background and green background, they sort of think like the white background means that there's no vegetation, meaning like there's no trees. Well, that's not the case. So the area on the map where it is open is indicated typically with yellow or orange, which is what you're seeing here. Area of whiteness typically is like more runnable open terrain. And then different shades of green from light to dark typically indicate more thick vegetation. So if you see an area on an orienteering type map that's like really, really dark green, that's typically, it's going to be very difficult to travel through, versus an area that's white would be easier to travel through. An area that's yellow, this orangey color here is wide open, so that's like super easy to go through. That is a very sort of like a new concept if you've never orienteered before. So just be aware and look for the legend on an orienteering type map to know what you're looking at. All right, now we are not planning to have any satellite imagery maps for this race, but in one of the VentureQuests that we had at Pohick Bay a few years ago, I did have a satellite imagery map, and this is what this shows. And the reason why I did this is because the topographic map for this area wasn't good enough. It didn't reflect what actually was happening on the ground. And the best way for people to navigate through these channels that you see here was using satellite imagery. This is another example of a map. So the things to know about a map like this is that and you contrast it with an orienteering style map, is typically you're going to have less detail. So you can see you have lots of contour lines, which can tell you at a more intricate level what's going on with the topography. Whereas this style map has less contour lines and less details about what's happening on the ground. Now, the reason why I might use this type of map versus this style map is if I give you a map like this, it's not that critical that you see all the details of the topography that's going on. What's more important is that you can see the trails and where they go and roads and things like that to be able to navigate. Trevor, hold your question for 1 second. This is another example of a topographic map, and you can see it's super, super detailed. This is a map of the Fountainhead area. So my point of showing you different style maps is that in an adventure race, whether it's VentureQuest or somewhere else, you may see different style maps. So don't let it throw you. Assume that the race director, and assume that me in this case is giving you all the information you need to navigate your way through the course with the information that's provided on the maps. Okay. All right. So you check in, you get your maps, and you get your rules of travel. Again, the first thing to do is read the whole route rules of travel, start to finish. Lots of teams start plotting and start figuring out their routes from the very beginning. Personally, that's not the way I do it, and I think it's a mistake. Typically, you read it from start to finish, think about the big picture of the event first, and then go down to think about what you're going to be doing in each of the particular legs. It's a good idea to carry some stuff to write with, especially in the beginning of the race, where you can mark up your maps and write things on them. So a lot of people like highlight on their maps maybe the route that they're going to take. Sometimes people write little clues on the maps themselves so they don't have to go back and forth between the map and the rules of travel. There's a whole set of techniques and lots of different ways to mark up maps, but it's a good idea, like if you're going to show up at the race, bring a pen, maybe a Sharpie, and maybe a highlighter or two. Those would be useful tools. All right, let me address a couple questions. So Serge asks, with the various map formats, are there beginner, intermediate, advanced versions aligned to experience? So in our race, no. And let me give you a little bit more insight into how I design the races. So I try to make the events fun for everybody, which is a little bit of a challenge, because if you have somebody who's a super good navigator, they're gonna get a lot of joy out of really intricate navigation with a really detailed orienteering type map, versus a beginner, that would be a very stressful experience for them, and they might not have enough skill or experience to use that map the way it should be used to navigate their way around. So the way I design the courses typically is have, for all intents and purposes, all the points be optional, knowing that not everyone is going to get all the points, all the checkpoints. And so there will be times in VentureQuest and probably other races that you guys might go do where you have to decide, are there points that we don't get, either because they're too difficult, too far away, maybe it's a long mountain bike leg and you're like, I don't want a mountain bike, so I'm not going to go all this way. Or maybe they're just too intricate and too challenging from a navigation standpoint. And that's totally okay. But everyone gets the same maps. I hope that answers your question. Okay, Trevor, you had a great question, and I didn't want to confuse you. So the rules of travel that I showed from, this was a couple years ago. This one, I started the race off and group people in different groups. That's not going to be the case in VentureQuest. Everybody has the same rules of travel. Everybody does the major flow of the events the same. And so if the flow is basically trek, bike, paddle, trek, bike, like in the 6-hour race, everyone is going to go through those disciplines in the same order. However, within a particular leg, there will be opportunities to do things in whatever order makes sense for you. A good example is an orienteering section. Sometimes orienteering sections are, in adventure racing specifically, are defined like point to point to point to point. Other times they're more Rogaine style, which means you can kind of go out and get the points in whatever order makes sense for you. I'm a fan of that type of design because it allows people to sort of do some thinking and think about how to go through the different points in a way that makes sense for them. All right, so Aaron had a question. Provided paddles are single or double bladed. The kayak paddles are double bladed, meaning if you are a soloist, you get a kayak and you have a double bladed kayak paddle. If you are on a team of 2 or 3, everyone gets single bladed canoe paddles. All right, and you can see that here. So Josh in the top picture there, he's in a kayak and he's got a double bladed kayak paddle. And then the bottom picture, we have 2 guys in a canoe with single bladed canoe paddles. All right. Here's an example. Eric and others, they were paddling, they happen to bring their own paddles. And so they are paddling 3 in a boat with double bladed kayak paddles they happen to bring themselves. So having 3 people in a boat is a common question I get. Paddling canoes is not that common if you've never really adventure raced before or don't paddle. And putting 3 people in a boat is super not common. And so if you happen to be a 3-person team, and my advice to you would be don't stress about it too much. You know, it's totally doable. These boats are really very stable. I would say one of the best things you can do is have that middle person get as low in the boat as possible, which will help make the boat more stable. But the water's warm, so even if falling, it'd be okay. All right, bikes. So the biking section, typically in an adventure race, you see a variety of terrain. In this edition of VentureQuest, it's going to be a lot of single track. So if you don't have a lot of experience riding single track, get out and ride some over the next couple of weeks. I had a question earlier today via email from somebody asking about can they ride a gravel bike? And my answer was like, yes, there's nothing in the rules to prevent you from riding a gravel bike if you want to, or a cyclocross bike or whatever you have. But if I had my choice, I would certainly ride a mountain bike on this course. A gravel bike is not going to be faster. Even though it might be a little bit lighter than other bikes, it's not going to be faster. I'll tell you that. A mountain bike is your bike of choice, for sure. Let's see. All right. And trekking. All right. So a couple other resources, and then I'll open it up for other questions. And we're right at 8 o'clock, so I want to be conscious of people's time. So I mentioned USARA and ARWS, so U.S. Adventure Racing Association and the Adventure Racing World Series. If you haven't been to their websites, just Google them and check them out. They have lots of great resources, lots of great events to sort of explore. We are blessed to live in an area that has the best orienteering club in the whole country. So Quantico Orienteering Club, QOC. If you just Google QOC, it'll come right up. They have events all the time in the fall, winter, and spring, including an upcoming event at Seneca Creek State Park. And there is a big intro to orienteering this Saturday, I think. think it's this Saturday. So if you're new and you want to check it out and learn what it's about, you should check out the QOC website and look into checking out an orienteering meet. And then practice. So I will tell you, I've been adventure racing for 17 years, and I would say I can hold my own at most events I go to, but I certainly did not start that way. And I made a lot of mistakes and practiced a lot and raced a lot and learned something all the time. And I still do every single race that I do. So again, if this is going to be your first event, first sort of foray into adventure racing, enjoy it, have an awesome time, and then go out. And if you find it's your jam, go out and find some other races to do, because it really is an amazing sport, an amazing community of people. And it's my hope that if you do VentureQuest, you want to go out and do other adventure races. And now the last thing I'll leave you with is, so I actually, I found there's an article in 1993 in the LA Times that had a quote from Mark Burnett. Again, Mark Burnett is the survivor guy who did the raid Gawa and ended up creating Eco Challenge. But he said, you know, they got their butts handed to them basically when they did this race back in the 90s, and they did awful. But he said there was two main failures in the team. One is inadequate map reading experience. So a lot of people don't have a lot of experience reading maps. So if you want to get into adventure racing, I would really encourage you to go to some QOC meets and start learning how to orienteer and read a map. And the second thing is, he says, a lack of comfort in the outdoors. You can be an athlete, but you also have to be able to stand being wet, cold, and hungry. Now, in a race like VentureQuest, that's you know, it's long. 6 hours to 10 hours is long, depending on your frame of reference. You know, but you're not going to like be frozen for days on end. But I will tell you, if adventure racing sparks an interest to you, a lot of people ask me, like, or I see discussions on forums like, how do I train for an adventure race? I will tell you that it's not that hard. Yes, you can be very disciplined about it for sure, but the best way to train for an adventure race is to spend time outside and doing the disciplines that make up adventure racing. So going on hikes and trail runs and mountain bike rides and paddling, doing those things for however long you want to do them for, gains you experience in what it's like to be outside. And maybe it's not like the perfect conditions when you're outside. And that's when you learn how to be resilient and what gear works and things like that. You don't learn that. I mean, you get ideas from reading books and stuff like that, but you learn that by being outside and making mistakes and learning firsthand, like, well, that didn't work too well. So that's my advice to you is spend time outside. And that's the best way to get better at being comfortable, being uncomfortable. Other resources. So there is a permanent orienteering course at Fountainhead, which is another great one. There's an old one at Hemlock as well. I believe Prince William Forest still has their orienteering courses. Years ago, you used to be able to go to the office and like get maps and like check them out. I haven't been there in years. I'm not sure if they do that. But Fountainhead, you can find the printable map and go out and try an orienteering course. CVOC, Aaron, thank you for that. Central Virginia Orienteering Club. Oh yeah, they have a night orienteering one at Pocahontas, which is just down outside of Richmond. That's another great resource. And ODDC, there is, not sure there'll be beer on the course, but we'll definitely have beer afterwards. Oh yeah, Selena, Little Bit has an orienteering course as well, and one in Westminster. So there's lots of great resources. QOC is a great resource, and it's a wonderful organization. So go to a QOC meet, and but there are some permanent ones if you don't want to, you know, you can't get to a meet or what have you. All right. Does anybody have questions before we sort of wrap up? Scoring. Okay, a couple other questions. Good. What do you do if you are seeking, like looking for a checkpoint, like in order, and you can't find one? You skip it, keep moving. So the way I score the events is it's by most checkpoints and then time. The only exception to that is, and this is going to be true in VentureQuest, there's going to be specific rules about like get like X number of points in leg 1, for example, before you go on to leg 2. And so you have to get like try to get that many. Like if you were to get like, say it's like 8 total points in leg 1, and I tell you, hey, get 3 only. And if you get like all 8, well, you're not going to get credit for those other ones. Like it's specifically going to tell you in the rules like how many you're supposed to get. But generally within a leg, if you miss one, just keep moving on. You just don't get credit for it. Let's see, and I hope that explains the missed points. The other thing you're going to see in most rules of travel, this is generally true in I think 99% of the races I've done, and true in VentureQuest, unless it says specifically otherwise in your rules of travel, once you move on from a leg in the race, typically you can't go back to that leg on a later time. So I'll give you an example. Say a bike leg has like 3 points in it that you're going to get. And then you go on to the next leg, which is trekking. Typically, unless it tells you so in the rules of travel, you can't go back to that previous leg and get those points. So I hope that makes sense. But more often than not, that's like a standard MO in adventure races. And again, it may tell you something otherwise in a rules of travel, but unless it says that, it's typically going to say like, hey, once you leave that leg, you can't go back and get those points again. If you know time is up, do you just come back to home base? Great question. So part of the challenge, and I will be very clear in sort of the pre-race communications and my pre-race brief about timing. So if, say, for example, you're on your way back and there's some points left on the course and it's almost time is up, please don't go off and get those other points and stay out until midnight. I will be worried about you because I don't know where you are, and you get points deducted when you come back late. So it is in your best interest to come back by the time allocated. So again, it's by 3 o'clock in the afternoon if you're doing the 6-hour race, and by 6 p.m. if you're doing the 10-hour race. And that is universally true in every single adventure race that you're gonna do. It's typically way more beneficial to come back on time than it is to come back late. Jennifer had a question. Does a 6-hour course have the same points located in the same areas as a 10-hour, just fewer? It's a good question. Yes and no. The 10-hour race does go different places than the 6-hour course, but they do use some of the same area. And in the 10-hour course, there is some overlap in the points. And then the 10-hour course does have some additional points in one or more of those areas. That's a good question. All right, any other questions? Anything at all? I'm happy to answer anything that's on your mind. Again, my goal is to help make you feel more comfortable. And I will say, if something comes up after this, or maybe you have a conversation with the team, you're welcome to send me an email. Speaking of teams, one other thing I didn't really address is teamwork. And the most important thing for teams who are just starting out is to have a conversation before race morning about 2 things. One is, what are your collective goals for the race? Are you going to win? Are you going to have fun, or something in the middle? And who's doing the navigating? And it's totally okay if the answer within a team is we're all going to try to do it together, because maybe a team doesn't really have a good navigator. So you might start off all being in the same boat and trying to figure it out together. That's a common answer for a lot of teams who are starting out, if you don't have like a person who's clearly more experienced from a navigation standpoint. But I would talk about those two things. Who's navigating? What are your goals? There's a mismatch of goals within a team has destroyed many a teams over the years. So it's good to have a conversation about that, not on race morning. Go have a beer or set up a phone call before the event and talk about it, just so nobody's surprised. Because again, you want it to be a positive experience for everybody who's involved. So, let's see. Serge, good question. How do you keep the 100-foot rule? It's self-policed, if you will. Teams can, if one team sees, another team like blatantly breaking it, there are penalties for that. The most common thing that happens, and most of the time it's not intentional, is, you'll be going to a checkpoint and one person runs ahead a little bit and punches the control, and then the rest of the team catches up and whatever. The reason why it's 100 feet is to keep that distance small. What we don't like to see in the sport is, there's a checkpoint like a half mile away, and like the person who feels the best runs the half mile, grabs it, and then comes back to their team. That's not in the spirit of the sport and kind of not what it's about. So that's why that rule is in place. But there's no way to know unless it's self-reported or other teams see teams blatantly kind of breaking it. Let's see. Share details of overnight camping. I will send more details in another communication, but basically in a nutshell, you can camp Friday night and Saturday night. It's $20 a person, one or both nights. It's primitive field camping. There's porta johns, but that's pretty much it. But you're welcome to have at it. Will the adventure races be around the same time? Will next year's adventure race be around the same time in the year? Yes. I am planning next year. Looks like it's going to be September 30th is the date for VentureQuest next year. Are there advantages to 3-person team versus a 2-person team? That's a really good question. It depends on the makeup of the team. The pros of having an extra person is you have now 3 sets of eyes versus 2 sets of eyes. So when you're looking for a checkpoint, you have a whole other person to help you look. That can be beneficial. That 3rd person can bring an extra skill set that maybe that 2-person team doesn't have. The downside is now you have a 3rd bike that could break. You have a 3rd person who could, stomach could turn and they slowing down. In adventure racing, you're only as fast as your slowest teammate, right? So there's a great benefit to helping each other progress as quickly as possible as you can as a team. So the more people you have, the more bad things can happen, right? So there are pros and cons. Let's see. Will marriage counselors be available for married couples? Yeah. I would say the same advice goes for married couples that it does for every team. Have a conversation about what your goals are before you show up on race morning. Having raced with my wife many times, I will tell you that there is occasionally conflict, but we're still married after racing together. And so yeah, but have a conversation. Any rules against working with other teams? That's a great question. And the question was, if I'm interpreting it right, are there rules about like if 2 teams are either friends or maybe they're not friends, can they help each other during the event? Absolutely. There's been many a times where I've been in a race where teams come together to help each other find a particular control or whatever. Now, I will say it's not always the case. There are teams who actively try to avoid that because they might know exactly where it is and they don't want to lead another team to it who might be having trouble. But there's nothing in the rules that says other teams can't help each other. Let's see. More for the rest of us if married couples don't. Yeah. So I think let me just scan through the chat. I think I got all the questions. Again, if you have stuff that comes up, well, you have roads that are not allowed to travel on. It's a good question, Tim. And yes, there will be roads that are prohibited in the rules of travel, 100%. But again, all that is outlined in the rules. It'll tell you where you can and can't go. Let's see. All right, I think that's it. I'm very grateful for your time. Thank you. I can't wait to see you all at VentureQuest. It's going to be so fun. If you have questions, like in the next couple of weeks, my cell phone is always in every single email that I send, and my email is always there. So really, I mean it. Send me a text, a phone call, email, and I will do my best to get back to you with that information. Tracy, you asked a question. How experienced of a biker do you need to be? What I would say is you don't have to be like a professional by any stretch of the imagination, but you should have ridden on dirt before. I guess I'll put it that way. And if you're new to mountain biking, I would find some trails to ride over the next couple of weeks to get yourself comfortable. If you send me an email and tell me where you live, I can give you suggestions of where to go, of terrain that'll be similar to what you're going to be riding in VentureQuest. I'm happy to do that. Well, that's it, everybody. Have an awesome evening. I can't wait to see you guys on October 1st. And again, if you have questions that come up, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help. All right, see you, everybody.
Question, Andy.
Yes, sir.
So at road crossings, this is Sam.
Hi, Sam.
At road crossings,
yeah,
will there be somebody to stop traffic for us, or do we need to just on our own make sure we don't get hit by cars? Or I know the roads around there are pretty heavily trafficked, so if a lot of people are crossing at one time, that might be a little bit precarious. I don't know.
Yeah, so there are certainly road crossings, depending, it sounds like you're really familiar with the area. So yes, there are certain areas that are like trails cross roads. It's on the athletes to cross safely. I will tell you that I thought a little bit about that in the design of the course. But there will not be police officers at every single road crossing.
Okay.
There are several.
I know there's a few where like you just like the trail just like dumps you out onto the road, and so that's right. You got to make sure you're on your toes.
That's right. Yeah, and honestly, that having more people isn't necessarily a bad thing, because once the first person goes across, if there's a line of 10 people or whatever, it's actually more noticeable than just a single person kind of riding. But yes, there are road crossings, but it's not. I think it'll be okay. Yeah, but it's the teams, it's the persons. Just like if you're riding out there by yourself, it's your responsibility to make sure it's safe to cross. Good question, though. Anything else? Going once, going twice. All right, have an awesome evening, everybody. I really appreciate you spending time with me, and I can't wait to see everybody at VentureQuest. See you later.